trade is going to pay either the correct or no tariff at all at the border.
Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, so the Minister of State, I believe, has said something quite interesting, and I do hope that his backbenchers are listening very carefully. So he says that the Chequers free trade proposal will require no new technology and will involve no tracking of goods. But how can that be possible if there is no divergence on tariffs, no divergence on regulation? In other words, on trade in goods, we will continue exactly as we are at present.
I'm afraid the Right Honourable Lady might not have sat through all of the Prime Minister's statement in response to questions on Monday, but my Right Honourable friend Lane made it very clear that we are actively looking in these new circumstances, but frankly we would, as a sensible government, be looking anyway at the opportunities that new technology offers and will offer in the future to minimise friction on trade for businesses of all kinds.
Emily Thornberry.
The Minister of State cannot answer these simple questions of detail because he cannot admit the truth. The truth is that the Chequers proposal is total delusion. The UK cannot set its own tariffs on goods and keep frictionless trade with the EU. The technology to do so doesn't exist. So there will be no divergence on tariffs in the free trade area, no divergence on regulation. It is a customs union in all but name. But, Mr. Speaker, it does not cover our service industries because the government claims that this is the great area of potential to negotiate trade agreements with the rest of the world. But can I ask the Minister of State to explain why a country like China would agree to import more of our services if it cannot agree in turn to lower tariffs on their goods?
No, I think, first of all, I do think that the Right Honourable Lady has misunderstood still the customs arrangement we are proposing, and I would advise her to look at the white paper when it's published tomorrow. The reason why we are proposing to treat services differently is that it is in services where regulatory flexibility matters most for both current and future trading opportunities. And it's also the case that while the EU acquis on goods has been stable for about 30 years, the EU acquis on services has not been, and the risk of unwelcome EU measures coming into play through the acquis on services is much greater.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have asked the Minister of State why China would accept such a one-way deal on services, and the answer is that they would not. It is simply another Chequers delusion, a Brexit deal dream with no grip on reality. And there is an easy answer to this mess, an alternative that will offer all the benefits of the Chequers free trade area, with no new technology, no cost, no delay, an alternative that both this House and Europe will accept, and an alternative covering both goods and services. So can I appeal to the Minister of State to accept that alternative, do what I urged him to do 2 years ago, and instead of trying to negotiate some half-baked backdoor version of the customs union, get on with negotiating the real thing.
Mr. Speaker, again the Right Honourable Lady keeps silent about what the Labour Party is actually proposing. And the truth is...
Order! I want to hear the Chancellor of the Duchy's reply. I say in the most genial possible spirit to the Honourable Lady, the member for Lincoln, that she is allowing her blood pressure to rise unduly. And I say in a humanitarian spirit, calm yourself and let us hear the ministerial reply. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the party opposite says that they would strike new trade deals, but their plan to stay in the customs union prevents that because it would bind us to the common commercial policy for all time. They used to say, that they'd control our borders, but they backed an amendment to the withdrawal bill to let freedom of movement continue. And the Labour Party used to say that they respected the referendum result. But now they are toying once again with the idea of a second referendum. The Labour leader won't rule it out, the Deputy Leader won't rule it out, the Shadow Brexit Secretary won't rule it out, and nothing could be better calculated to undermine our negotiating position and lessen our chances of a good deal than holding out that prospect of a second vote. And whichever side, Mr. Speaker, any of us campaigned on in that referendum, the country made a decision, and we should now get on with the task in hand. That's what the government is doing.
Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of State seems to argue that by leaving the EU, the British people voted against a customs union. But that seems to be completely the opposite to what he used to say. I mean, I have taken back to 2011, and when he said that the yes-no referendum would not give us the information that he said, and I quote, that sharp division between the status quo and quitting the EU does not reflect the breadth of views held in this country. For example, he said, if people voted to leave the EU, would that mean having no special relationship with the EU, or would it mean a relationship like Norway's? Now, he said it. My question is, we understand what he's saying, but when did he stop agreeing with himself? I fear when we look back on this week as one where the government could have taken a decisive step towards a sensible, workable deal to protect jobs and trade, but we have ended up with them proposing a dog's Brexit, which will satisfy no one, which will not fly in Europe, which will waste the next few weeks and will take us increasingly closer.
The Chancellor of the Duchy. Thank you. No, I think we've heard it. I think we've heard... Order! Order! To be fair, to be fair, I think we've heard it, and we've heard it fully, and that's absolutely right. The Chancellor of the Duchy.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, the Right Honourable Lady gave away her misunderstandings. Her question seemed to imply she thinks Norway is actually in a customs union with the European Union. That it's not. What we have on the table from the government is a comprehensive set of proposals that we believe will deliver for British business in terms of frictionless trade, and will deliver on what people voted for in the referendum to restore to this House control of our laws, control of our borders and control of our money, and to achieve a new security partnership with our European neighbours that it is in the interests of every European country to achieve. That is something which the Right Honourable Lady should get behind us and support and work in the common interest instead of carping from the sidelines.
Andrew Rosindale!
My right honourable friend will be aware that in London we've experienced a 377% increase in moped crime in the last 2 years. As the Mayor of London has so failed to tackle crime, will my right honourable friend ensure that the government intervenes to make London the safest city in the world?
Mr. Speaker, let me say to my honourable friend that reports of crimes involving motorcycles, mopeds and scooters are clearly a concern, and we've been working with the police, industry and other partners to develop a comprehensive action plan to focus on what works and what more needs to be done. And the police are now using new tactics, including off-road bikes and DNA marker sprays to catch those committing these crimes. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is now consulting on proposals to give greater legal protection to police officers pursuing offenders. It takes action to secure a reduction in these crimes, not just a press release from the Mayor's office. Action is what this government is undertaking.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the 23rd anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. Yesterday I witnessed the heartbreaking testimony of two survivors of these heinous crimes against humanity, Dr. Ilyas Pilav and Nusreta Sirac. Today, we all must remember the victims who were tortured, raped and murdered. Will the Minister join with me to remember those victims, and will he commit on behalf of the Government to bring forward a debate before the summer recess to put on record our united position that we can remember and debate what measures we can take to help make sure that genocide such as this can never be allowed to happen again?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman reminds us that the horror of Srebrenica 23 years ago should remind us all of the intolerance that still exists in the world and of why there is a duty on all of us to do what we can to confront and overcome it and promote genuine reconciliation. My right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, will have heard his request for a debate. I hope the whole House will also, while remembering the appalling tragedy of Srebrenica, take some heart from the fact that yesterday's Western Balkans summit in London, bringing together the leaders of all Western Balkans countries in a spirit of cooperation and reconciliation, demonstrates that we have moved a long way in 23 years, but the right honourable gentleman is correct. We must never become complacent. We must always be aware of the need for continuing work and effort.
In Blackford.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his response? Anniversaries such as these should remind all of us of the dangers of extreme bigotry. The world that we live in today is a dangerous one. Tomorrow, the President of the United States of America will regretfully have the red carpet rolled out for him by this Conservative government. But from the public, the welcome will be far from warm. With protests planned across Scotland and the United Kingdom against President Trump's abhorrent policies and dangerous rhetoric, will the Minister follow the SNP's lead and challenge President Trump on his abysmal record on human rights, his repugnant attitude towards women and his disgusting treatment of minorities? Or does the Minister think he will simply follow the Prime Minister's lead and join the President hand in hand?
Now, Mr. Speaker, I do disagree with the right honourable gentleman on this. This country's relationship with the United States of America is probably the closest between any two democracies in the West. It has lasted through Democrat and Republican presidencies alike and through Labour and Conservative premierships on this side of the Atlantic. I would say to the right honourable gentleman, because of the security cooperation that we have with the United States, there are UK citizens who are alive today who might well not be alive had that cooperation and information intelligence sharing not taken place. And it is therefore right that we welcome the duly elected president of our closest ally, as we shall do tomorrow.
Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is growing concerns in my constituency about the proposed planning change, or planning powers changes for fracking applications being put forward for consultation by the government. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, the idea of treating non-fracking shale exploration as permitted development. So could my right honourable friend update me on when the consultation will be open, and does he also agree with me that these kinds of planning applications must come forward on the basis of local authority consent?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, shale gas has the potential to boost economic growth and support thousands of jobs across a number of sectors, as well as adding to this country's energy security, and the government's outlined how we believe shale gas planning decisions should be made quickly and fairly to all involved. We're committed to consulting on further shale gas planning measures. Those consultations are planned to open over the summer, and I want to reassure my honourable friend that these decisions will always be made in a way that ensures that shale can happen safely, respecting local communities and safeguarding the environment.
Mr. George Howarth.
The artificial pancreas, which is championed by the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, has the potential to transform the lives of those with type 1 diabetes. Will the right honourable gentleman agree to look at ways to increase access to diabetes technology, including the artificial pancreas and continuous glucose monitoring, so that everyone with type 1 diabetes will have access to the best available technology?
Can I first say that I want to recognise the work that the Right Honourable Gentleman personally has put into campaigning on this issue, and I'm also aware of the personal experience that he has of the devastating impact this condition can have on families. I want to reassure him that the government is committed to promoting the best possible care and treatment for people with diabetes as a priority. The National Institute for Health Research Biomedical Research Centre in Cambridge is pioneering the development and use of the artificial pancreas, and the prototype system is currently now being tested by people in their own homes. Now, I understand that the National Institute for Health Research Infrastructure supported more than 100 new studies and recruited almost 38,000 patients to help with those studies, so that work is ongoing to test the efficacy of the artificial pancreas, and I shall certainly draw the Right Honourable Gentleman's comments and his campaign on this issue to the attention of the new Secretary of State for Health.
Mr. Simon Orr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we enjoy the summer weather, it does, of course, present challenges to our farming community. Will my right honourable friend join the National Farmers Union and me in calling for people not to use sky lanterns, preferably ever, but certainly not during such a tinder-dry harvest? Our food producers do deserve our support.
My honourable friend raises an important issue, Mr. Speaker. Can I first say, I'm sure we'd all want to salute the incredible work of the firefighters, the military and other partner agencies in responding to the wildfires that we've seen in various parts of the country in the last couple of weeks. But I want to encourage all organisers of summer events to exercise caution in this hot climate, to follow Home Office guidance on outdoor fire safety and take steps to prevent the risk of fire from lanterns and fireworks. And I would also encourage organisers to think both about the fire risk but also about the impact that debris from lanterns has had on farmers' livestock in too many cases.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the collapse of Carillion 6 months ago, the new Royal Liverpool Hospital now stands unfinished and empty, a monument to corporate greed. Hospitals are for treating the sick, not lining the pockets of investors. So instead of waiting for commercial lawyers and accountants, holding secret meetings with no public accountability, will the government now call in this contract, buy out the investors and deliver a publicly owned, publicly run hospital for the people of Liverpool?
Well, first of all, I want to reassure the honourable gentleman we are absolutely committed to getting the Royal Liverpool Hospital built as rapidly as possible and securing best value for money in doing so. And we're supporting the Royal Liverpool and Broad Green University Hospitals NHS Trust in that work. I do not think, though, that what the honourable gentleman advocated, which was to buy out the interests of the banks who have lent money to this project, is the right approach to take. That would encourage irresponsible lending in the future against the prospect that there would be a government bailout down the line. And I think it is important that risk is seen to lie with the banks, with the lenders, and not be underwritten by the taxpayer. Now, we're working with the Trust actively and with the existing private sector funders to see if we can find a way forward for them to complete the remaining work on the hospital. And, Mr. Speaker, we hope this work will conclude in the very near future.
I have known the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Aylesbury for over 30 years, so I fully understand that the comprehensiveness of his replies reflects his past distinction as a noted academic. But I just gently make the point that I'm determined to get through the questions on the paper. Mr. Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the NATO summit this week, will my right honourable friend reassure me and my South Leicestershire constituents that this government will continue to see NATO as the bedrock of Britain's defence, given the range of threats that this nation faces, including the appalling use of nerve agents on British soil?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, as far as this government's concerned, NATO is and will remain the bedrock of our collective security, and certainly the threat posed by Russia will be one of the subjects that the Prime Minister and other leaders will be discussing at their summit in Brussels. I just reflect with regret on the fact that the Leader of the Opposition has said on the record he wishes that we were not part of NATO. The use of nerve agents in this country is appalling and impossible to excuse. The police continue to investigate what happened, how that attack was caused, and the government is also fully committed to supporting the region and its residents, and we've announced new financial help to Salisbury and the surrounding area today.
We're streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Until she was raped at the age of 18, my constituent led a healthy and happy life. Since then, she's suffered severe post-traumatic stress disorder, seizures and blackouts, panic attacks, anxiety and depression, heavily reliant on her mother's care. The Department for Work and Pensions has refused to award her the enhanced rate of personal independence payments on the basis that when she presented for her assessment, she wasn't demonstrating these particular symptoms at the time. And as a result, her mother is unable to claim income support and carer's allowance, placing financial hardship on top of severe emotional distress. Can I ask him to arrange a meeting for me with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions? Because what my constituent has experienced is, I'm afraid, another example of what we see week in, week out in our surgeries, which is the cruel and inhumane consequences of this government's welfare policies.
Well, I know that the honourable gentleman has campaigned on the issue of DIPG for some time, and I think the whole House would want to offer sympathies, which I certainly share, to his constituent and anyone affected by this appalling condition. I will certainly draw to the attention of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions the points that he has made, and I'm sure that a meeting will be arranged for him with either the Secretary of State or one of her ministers.
Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, every MP will have around 1,000 people in their constituencies that are on the autistic spectrum and who will suffer from anxiety and in crisis moments often will not know where to turn. Mr. Speaker, we're all familiar with this expression around here, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. So this week sees the launch of Molehill Mountain, a free, groundbreaking smartphone app which has been developed by the charity Autistica and will help autistic adults manage their anxiety. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming this fantastic new app which could help many people successfully manage their fears?
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all commend my right honourable friend for the work she continues to do through the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Autism to lead the campaign for better, more effective care for and support for people who have autistic spectrum disorders. I think that the changes to the special educational needs and disabilities system that came in 4 years ago have enabled us to join up state-provided services more effectively than in the past, but I'm more than happy to welcome this new app that she mentions and any other new technologies that will help people with autistic spectrum disorder.
Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Information Commissioner has fined Facebook for its involvement in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and the Electoral Commission has concluded that the Leave campaign broke electoral law. Is now not the time to set up a judge-led inquiry into the Brexit referendum? Because if the British people have been duped by Brexit shysters, they deserve to know about it.
Mr. Speaker, so far as the Information Commissioner's report is concerned, obviously this has only just been published and the government will want to consider the report and its recommendations in detail before responding. But I think the point he made focused upon the possibility of criminal offences having been committed. Now, rightly, we are in a country where it is not for ministers either to initiate or to stop criminal investigations or potential prosecutions. Where there is evidence, that should be drawn to the attention of the police and the prosecuting authorities, and then let the law take its course.
Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not consider myself a Brexiteer, but 2 years ago I was asked to make a choice about the future direction of the country I love. I voted to leave the EU, knowing it would be difficult, but believing our nation could make it work. I was not alone and am now joined by those who vote to remain who wish to respect our democracy. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that across our continent people are feeling dangerously ignored? And if democracy is to mean what we all thought it did, tomorrow's white paper will show that we in Britain at least will not deny the instruction our people have given us.
And my honourable friend is right, and I think that those of us who campaigned on the Remain side do need to respect the decision that the people of the country took and to ponder the damage that would be done to what is already fragile confidence in our democratic institutions were that verdict to be ignored. I'm confident that when my honourable friend reads the white paper tomorrow, she will see that we have a vision for a future relationship which meets the vote that the people delivered.
Julie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that the Minister will want to join with me in thanking hospices across the country for the fantastic work they do supporting the terminally ill and their families, and especially the Pendleside Hospice that supports my constituents. But is he aware that over the last 8 years, average government grants have been cut from 32% to 20%? And is he also aware that as these charities are outside the agenda for change, they are not eligible to apply for funding to cover the NHS pay award? Will he today commit that the government does value the work for hospices, and will he step in to get some extra funding to cover this award? Thank you.
I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker, to pay tribute to the work done at the Pendleside Hospice and to hospices around the country. I think it's important that we see hospices as a very important element in a spectrum of palliative care and care at the end of life that takes place sometimes in a hospice setting, sometimes in other settings. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will of course now be considering with the NHS leadership how to deliver on the ambitious long-term funding arrangement that the government recently announced. I'm sure he will bear the honourable lady's comments in mind.
Gets back some of our money from the EU and regional aid. Much of that money was used and is used to invest in agri-food, something that I believe Cornwall is a world leader in. How will this investment be able to continue without falling foul of state aid rules in this sector when the government has said there will be a common rule book?
Mr. Speaker, I confirm that any investment which is legally able to be made within state aid rules now would be able to continue in the future, and any United Kingdom funding for money currently received as EU regional aid would comply with those same state aid rules going forward.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, he's a good lad. Members of my family were either killed or badly injured working in the coal mines of the South Wales valleys. We owe all of our miners a debt of gratitude. Yet in recent years, the Treasury has raked in billions from their pension scheme. So can the Chancellor meet with me, retired miners and coalfield community MPs to fix this injustice?
I think we certainly recognise the hard work and the incredible risks that miners took in the honourable gentleman's constituency and many others. The important thing about the miners' pension scheme is that it should pay out all the promised benefits in full. My understanding is that the scheme is funded to do just that and that no former miner is going to lose out.
Murad!
Mr. Speaker, the UK and the US has a uniquely strong relationship when it comes to security and intelligence services, the results of which regularly save lives not only in the UK but across Europe. Could I ask that when our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, meets with President Trump, he thanks him for that relationship and the results of it, but might also take the opportunity to share with him the many incidents which I know my right honourable friend sitting here knows about, where it is UK intelligence, UK security services that have saved lives in the US.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct. The intelligence sharing and other security cooperation we have with the United States has saved lives in both countries. It is vital to both our interests that those relationships continue.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents in Brighton are sadly used to chaos from GTR, but the last 7 weeks have been a new level of rail hell. Since the GTR franchise is effectively run by the Department for Transport, will he shake up the government so it finally shows some action and leadership? Action in terms of restoring the Gatwick Express services at Preston Park, which have been inexplicably slashed, and leadership in terms of getting rid of the hapless Transport Secretary. The Prime Minister has been reshuffling her cabinet over the last week. Could she reshuffle it a bit more and get that Transport Secretary replaced by...
Much indeed. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
As regards GTR, improvements are simply not happening quickly enough, despite assurances that the operators have given. We have launched a review of Govia Thameslink, which will report in the next few weeks. And if those findings show that Govia is at fault, we won't hesitate to take action, whether that's fines, restricting access to future franchises, or stripping them of the franchise. Passengers deserve far better than they're getting at the moment in terms of service, and we will hold those operators to account.
Mr. Speaker, Albania has one of the highest rates of honour killing in Europe. Will the government look very closely at the case of Mrs. Emiliana Muka, who was staying in the constituency of the member for Norwich South, and now, thanks to the generosity of her therapist, is staying in South Norfolk in the therapist's own house to reduce the risk of self-harm, and who, if she were deported to Albania, possibly as early as tomorrow, might be the victim of an honour killing?
Mr. Speaker, obviously I don't know all the details of this case, but I'm aware that this is an issue which has brought together my honourable friend, the honourable member for Norwich South, and my honourable friend, the member for Mid Norfolk. The Home Secretary or the Immigration Minister will be happy to meet with the honourable members concerned to discuss the case.
Clive Lewis. The honourable gentleman is... Well, a great self-denying ordinance on the part of the honourable gentleman. His question's been answered and therefore he's satisfied. If that were a template for the House as a whole, just think of the possibilities. Laura Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister explain what the Prime Minister's Brexit proposals would mean for those working for two of the largest employers in my constituency, Bentley Motors and the NHS?
Good news, it would be very good news for both of them, and particularly, the automotive industry has been arguing for many months that we need to get a deal that ensures frictionless trade with the EU 27. That is what the model we are proposing will deliver.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the extra $20 billion for the NHS and a long-term plan for the NHS. But will the First Minister agree with me that at a time when local authority budgets are under pressure, it would be attractive to have more pooling of budgets between health and social care?
It's very important that the National Health Service and local authorities work closely together to ensure that community-based care, funded from whichever source, is effective and meets patients' needs. That is something that I know the new Health Secretary, like his predecessor, is determined to take forward further.
Dennis Skinner.
Is the Minister aware that already his government have taken more than £3.5 billion out of the miners' pension? They're like Philip Green and Maxwell put together. Stop stealing the miners' pension.
Mr. Speaker, the benefits due from the pension scheme to all former miners have, as I understand it, been paid in full, continue to be paid in full, and the scheme is fully funded to meet those commitments into the future.
Order! Statement, the Secretary of State for Defence, Secretary Gavin Williamson.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on Afghanistan. The United Kingdom will never forget the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the thousands of innocent women, men and children killed in this atrocity. This barbaric violence prompted the United Kingdom, alongside our NATO allies, to enter Afghanistan, to ensure that terrorists could not use it as a base from which to attack our citizens at home or abroad. And before I continue, I want to pay tribute to the efforts of tens of thousands of brave British men and women who have served in Afghanistan for the past 16 years. We will never forget what they did, particularly those 456 brave men and women who paid the ultimate price, as well as those who suffered life-changing injuries in the line of duty. Their service and sacrifice has not been in vain, as I saw for myself when I visited in March. Not only do millions of ordinary Afghans now have access to clean water, vital medicine and education, which wouldn't have seemed possible less than 20 years ago. Not only have they enabled the Afghan people to take charge of their own security, and not only is the capability of the Afghan National Defence and Security Forces growing, but elections are giving a voice to the people of Afghanistan who are increasingly calling for peace, something that would have seemed unthinkable a short time ago. Our commitment to Afghanistan remains an enduring one. Although UK combat operations ended in 2014, our troops are playing a key role in NATO's Resolute Support mission by leading the Kabul Security Force. They're performing a vital role, training, advising and assisting the Afghan Army and Air Force, developing the nationwide security structures that will strengthen Afghanistan's democracy. They have a quick reaction force who work alongside the Afghan National Army to provide urgent help in Kabul if and when required. And they're continuing to work alongside their Afghan, Australian, New Zealand and Danish partners at the Army Officer Academy to mentor staff. Since opening in 2013, it has held its 11th graduation. More than 3,000 high-quality officers have passed out of this great institution, modelled on our own Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. They're making a genuine difference in helping the Afghan National Defence and Security Forces maintain security and keep its citizens safe. The momentum is with Afghan forces, and the Taliban cannot militarily win. Ultimately, in the long term, Afghanistan's only chance for a better future is through a peaceful negotiation that is Afghan-led. And significant progress is already being made. The United Kingdom welcomes the government of Afghanistan's offer to start a discussion on a political process with the Taliban, supported by the recent ceasefire. And it is encouraging to see bilateral relations with Pakistan improving, which helps build wider stability in the region. Critically, over the coming 12 months, parliamentary and presidential elections are to be held, giving ordinary people the chance to shape their nation's destiny, very much for the better. But despite the growing confidence of Afghan forces, atrocities such as the appalling attack against the Intercontinental Hotel at the start of the year, which killed 42 people, it demonstrates that the insurgency has proven resilient. It still controls parts of Afghanistan, and it continues to conduct brutal suicide attacks, killing innocent people. Of equal concern is the fact terrorist groups such as Daesh are seeking a foothold in the region in order to be able to conduct operations against Britain and other nations. Given the upcoming elections and efforts by the Afghan government to reach a political settlement, NATO has recognised that now is a critical time to give extra support. So today, in response to NATO's request and in recognition of the professionalism and competence of our armed forces, I can announce that we'll be increasing the number of troops to support our existing mission, sending an additional 440 personnel in non-combat roles to take the total UK contribution to around 1,100 personnel. This will make the United Kingdom the first largest troop contributor to the NATO operation. Around half of the 440 additional personnel will deploy in August. The remainder will follow no later than February next year. The additional soldiers will initially deploy from the Welsh Guards, who already currently provide the UK's contribution to the Kabul security force. Today's decision underlines our commitment to the people of Afghanistan. It will help strengthen the institutions that preserve Kabul's security and enable the Afghan-led peace process to develop. It will also send a signal to the Taliban that we will not abandon this proud nation, nor can they simply outwait our departure. And it shows our commitment to NATO, which in a darker, more unpredictable world must remain the cornerstone of our defence. But above all, it reiterates Britain's commitment to strengthen the security of our nation. History teaches us that the prize of a more secure Afghanistan is peace and security for all. I commend this statement to the House.
Neil Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for advance sight of it. And I join with him in paying tribute to all those servicemen and women who have served and are serving in Afghanistan. We remember the 456 men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice there, and those who continue to live with injuries sustained during the conflict. And we commend the courage shown by our Afghan partners who work under the constant threat posed by insurgents. Madam Deputy Speaker, as alliance leaders gather in Brussels today, we reaffirm our commitment to NATO and to the range of operations that it supports around the world. The UK has always played its full part in contributing to these NATO missions, and we currently have personnel deployed in Kosovo and in Somalia, as well as on the Resolute Support Mission. It is right that the skills and professionalism of our armed forces can be used to benefit our partners in Afghanistan by training Afghan forces to the same high standards. Can I ask the Secretary of State for some further detail on today's announcement? Firstly, could he outline the planned timetable for our troops to remain in Afghanistan? Our armed forces have a range of technical skills, so can he say more about the specific work that they will be undertaking? Will the training offered to our Afghan partners focus on specialist activities or continue to be more general in scope? As the Secretary of State will be aware, there has recently been some concern about the eligibility rules for operational allowances. So can he confirm that troops will continue to receive the allowance for their work in Afghanistan? The Resolute Support Mission currently comprises some 16,000 personnel from 39 NATO member states and partners. So can the Secretary of State set out what discussions he has had with other NATO allies about upping their commitment to the mission? Of course, the work of the armed forces in Afghanistan must form part of a wider strategy to promote good governance there. So what discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Foreign Office about how the two departments can support one another? We welcome the U-turn in government policy on locally employed staff, such as interpreters or drivers, whose work in Afghanistan has been vital to the UK and to NATO's efforts in the country. Could he update us on the progress that his department has made on this issue? Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that members across the House support the important work of our personnel in Afghanistan, recognising it as part of the process towards reaching a lasting peace settlement. But we must also be clear that this work is quite distinct from the combat operations that ended in 2014. So finally, can I ask the Secretary of State just to confirm that these additional troops will be there for training and not in a combat role? Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In terms of the Honourable Lady raises a number of very important points. What we want to do is to be in Afghanistan to make sure that we get the right outcomes in terms of a peace process, and I don't think it is possible for us to be putting a date as to when that is going to be concluding, but we continue to work very closely with all allies within that NATO coalition, but most importantly with the Afghan government, the Pakistan government, actually trying to promote and bring that peace process forward as rapidly as possible. The work that's going to be undertaken is going to be with a Kabul security force, which we have been leading, and that does entail the fact that there is a rapid reaction force element to that, that means supporting the Afghan forces if there are incidences. So, you know, we do have a force there, but it's very much there to support them. In terms of personnel, all personnel will be in receipt of operational allowance, and this is something that I know is very important when we're asking service personnel to put themselves in harm's way and do such an important and valuable job. And in terms of working with all departments, just to re-emphasise, our work, not just with the FCO, but also the Department for International Development, but also with other organisations right across the international sphere, is pivotal in terms of bringing a peaceful resolution to Afghanistan.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand that this deployment sends a very strong signal, as he put it, to the Taliban that they will not be allowed to win. But does it send a sufficiently strong signal to the Treasury, an even more formidable opponent, that an uplift in the defence budget towards 2.5% and eventually 3% of GDP is necessary to fund our global role adequately?
Secretary of State.
Well, we were very much focusing on the Taliban as relation to this uplift. But what this goes to show is actually how Britain can make a difference in the world. We talk about global Britain, but this is a brilliant personification of actually how we can make a difference in different nations. And it is our armed forces that so often our nation turns to, whether in the most recent difficulties that we've had in terms of dealing with the problems in Salisbury, or whether in Afghanistan, it is our armed forces that have the capabilities, that have the knowledge, that have the ability to deliver consistently for this nation.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Grateful to you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I too thank the Secretary for advance sight of his statement, associate myself with the comments he makes about the personnel, and of course extend our thoughts to their families, who I'm sure will be having a tough time at this announcement. Can I just press him slightly on the timetable? I'm not looking for a date or a specific length of time that he thinks this increase is going to last for, but does he view this in general as a long-term or a short-term increase? Could we also have regular updates on Afghanistan? I think it's one of the areas of the world that has perhaps fallen back in terms of the attention it receives in the Chamber. We regularly get updates on Syria, which is extremely helpful, and I think that might help us with Afghanistan as well. Thinking of Daesh in particular, the online community that Daesh spreads its poison in is clearly a massive problem. Can he give us any indication as to whether the training or resources that are going to be going to Afghanistan will be seeking to tackle their online presence to prevent their poison from spreading and gaining the foothold that none of us want to see them do? And finally, on the political process, the offer of talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban, could he lay out in general terms how hopeful he is that they will be successful and where he thinks they are in the political process right now?
Secretary of State.
I think there's a number of questions actually almost interrelate, especially his first one and his last one, in terms of what is the timetable. What we're wanting to do is we're not going to prejudge this. We're going to continue to work with other NATO allies in terms of we imagine that we constantly review our force structure, not just in terms of Afghanistan, but also in terms of Operation Shader in Iraq and Syria. So we'll be constantly reviewing this. We'll be trying to encourage other allies to continue to contribute to this, and we've already had discussions with other partners. So it is going to be a conditions-based approach in terms of how long our forces remain there. But we want to actually, in my discussions with the Afghan government, and I know that the previous Foreign Secretary's discussions, there's a real willingness and there's a real eagerness to try and sit around the table. And it was the first time that we've ever seen a ceasefire during Ramadan. And it was a very short ceasefire. But it was a chink of light, and it showed that actually progress can be made. And I think it is really important, not just for Great Britain, but other nations to be supporting the Afghan government at this critical time to actually seize this opportunity for peace.
Sir Michael Fallon.
Whilst the increase in non-combat support is to be welcomed, and the sacrifice of our own troops there should never be forgotten, should we not also acknowledge the massively greater contribution of the United States to the support of that very fragile democracy, and put on record this week our thanks to President Trump for the increase in United States troop numbers and in permissions that help in operations in Afghanistan that help keep us safe from the threat of transnational terrorism.
Secretary of State.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very important point in terms of the role that the United States has played in Afghanistan, doing so much to bring and promote stability in the country and actually dealing with terrorist threats that can manifest themselves at home. And if I can put on the record our appreciation not just to President Trump but also to their Defence Secretary Jim Mattis, and also General Nicholson, who has taken such an important and pivotal role in terms of leadership, in terms of dealing with the insurgency in Afghanistan over the last few years.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In supporting the statement the Defence Secretary has just made and the remarks of my own front bench, can I urge the Defence Secretary to redouble his efforts to explain to the British public why we are doing what we're doing and how it impacts on the security of our own citizens in this country. There is a lot more to be done with respect to that. I know the Defence Secretary is trying, but I really urge him to redouble his efforts to explain that.
Secretary of State.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments, and he's absolutely right, because actually an unstable Afghanistan leads to threats here in Britain, and we saw the ungoverned spaces that developed in Iraq and Syria, and how that they were able to use those ungoverned spaces in order to promote terrorist attacks here on the streets of Britain. And we have to deal with this at source, and I take on board the comments and will certainly do everything we can to explain to the British people the threat that Afghanistan presents.
Tom Tuggendat.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. For those of us who served in Afghanistan for many years and saw the importance of the coalition of the willing as it was then, would he agree with me that NATO has provided the fundamental underpinning not just of the security of Afghanistan but actually our own security? And today, as the summit is starting in Brussels, this is a moment to remember that the only time the Article 5 guarantee has been invoked was when the United States was attacked on 9/11. And we are therefore essentially reinforcing not just our own security, nor indeed just the security of the people of Afghanistan, but fundamentally the security of the people of the United States.
Secretary of State.
The NATO alliance is an alliance that has served every nation incredibly well, and he is right to point out the fact that actually Article 5 has only been revoked on that one occasion following the 9/11 attacks. And we mustn't underestimate the value, we mustn't underestimate the utility, and we need to continue to invest in NATO's future, keeping us all safe.
Ruth Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As ever, we owe a debt of gratitude to our armed forces and their families who will be supporting them during this deployment. As the NATO summit continues, what efforts are being made to encourage our other NATO allies to also increase their own commitments?
Secretary of State.
Well, as soon as I have completed this statement, I will be going to Brussels to have numerous bilateral meetings with our many NATO allies, and we need to be hammering home the message that actually for NATO to work, we all have to invest in it. We cannot expect one country to be carrying the burden all the time. We have all got to show that willingness to invest. And this is a message that I know the Prime Minister will be making. It's also a message that the United States will be making. And I think it's a message that's starting to get through.
Dame Cheryl Gillen.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for delaying his arrival at NATO today to make this important announcement himself from the dispatch box on what I believe is the largest deployment that he has authorised since he has been Secretary of State for Defence. Can I say that I share with everybody in this chamber the great respect for the Welsh Guards in particular, who will be playing a significant role. Could he also recognise the role that UK aid has made over the past few years, particularly in the education and training of young women and teachers? And doesn't this role of UK aid and the role of our service personnel complement each other in helping to make Afghanistan a more stable country?
Secretary of State.
My right honourable friend is correct in terms of it. We have to have UK aid and actually our security forces working hand in glove in order to actually build a viable future for Afghanistan. We have to promote the prosperity, we have to promote the education, and we have to support the Afghan government deliver an exciting and hopeful future for its people to have stability there.
Jamie Stone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I remind the Chamber that one of my children is serving in the armed forces. As the Secretary of State has said, we will have 1,100 service personnel deployed in Afghanistan. Some of these people will face lengthy deployments of months or perhaps even longer, and this is by definition stressful for them and their families. So can I ask the Secretary of State to assure me that a leave rota will be put in place that ensures that these people can come home to their families on a regular basis during their deployment in Afghanistan?
Secretary of State.
We will work very closely with the families' federations to ensure that that happens. If someone is on a 6-month tour, they have the ability to come back for 2 weeks during that tour. If someone is on a 9-month tour, they have the ability to come back for 2 sessions of 2 weeks. And we'll be working, obviously, with all forces to make sure that that is something that's made available to them.
Sir Edward Lee.
In welcoming this statement that our involvement is limited to training, will the Secretary of State assure the House that there will be no mission creep, no return to combat duties, and drawing heart from the positive scenes in Kabul during the ceasefire, which was very inspiring on the part of ordinary people in Kabul, will he, on behalf of Her Majesty's Government, say that all our efforts, indeed we should increase our efforts to encourage the political process and try and get the two sides talking to each other, because that's the only way we're going to get peace?
Secretary of State.
In terms of my statement, I've tried to be I've been absolutely clear as to what our commitment is, and we're not having any intention to change what we're doing as outlined in my statement. But the point is, we all want to find a peaceful solution for Afghanistan. That's why we'll continue to support the Afghan government in reaching that peaceful solution.
Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What is the Secretary of State doing with the Home Office to address the issues faced by the Afghan interpreters who've settled here under the government scheme and who are now facing real difficulties being reunited with their families here because of the normal spousal visa rules? Their work was crucial and dangerous, and they deserve better.
Secretary of State.
We, as a department, we've consistently worked very closely with the Home Office to ensure that any issues that have been brought to our attention have been resolved. We've made a change in our policy just a few weeks ago that would hopefully be of further assistance to more of those people who helped and supported the British Armed Forces, and we'll continue to review that and do what help we can.
Desmond Swain.
President Ghani over his lack of cooperation on the return of failed asylum seekers, he told me that as a war president, his priority was the young men and women taking the fight to the Taliban rather than those who'd run away. It was a fair point, wasn't it?
Secretary of State.
I think we recognise the enormous contribution that so many people paid, not just in terms of working with British forces, but actually the Afghan security forces who every single day are taking the fight to insurgents, and that is not just Taliban, but that is Daesh, and that is other states which are seeking to extend their influence into Afghanistan as well.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself and my colleagues with the tribute the Secretary of State has made to those who paid the supreme sacrifice, including many from Northern Ireland? I think of several in my own constituency. Can I also ask him, given the deployment that's about to take place, what steps is he going to take to ensure that other nation states will share with the skills and training that we obviously have, so that there is a better future for everyone in Afghanistan?
Secretary of State.
This is very much a coalition effort, and last year we saw a number of nations that actually stepped up and increased their effort and deployment in Afghanistan, and we'll be pushing this point going forward. We want to see all nations making a larger contribution to this NATO mission, and we hope very much to lead by example.
Leo Doherty.
Will the Secretary join with me in thanking members of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards from the Aldershot Garrison for the continued contribution they make to the security and stability of Kabul? And will he tell the House what is his assessment of the link between the Taliban in Afghanistan and elements of Daesh?
State.
I'd certainly like to thank all those service personnel, the many, many thousands, tens of thousands, who have contributed to the efforts to make sure that Afghanistan is not a safe place for terrorism. The link between Taliban and Daesh, I mean, what we're seeing is we're seeing more and more Daesh fighters increasingly heading from Iraq and Syria into Afghanistan. And this is why we need to be making these moves to ensure that they do not create a space that they're able to operate in.
Stephen Doughty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, watching the fantastic RAF 100 celebrations yesterday, I thought very much of brave RAF pilots who I was lucky enough to be flying with when I visited Afghanistan in the past, in the middle of the conflict, and the incredible role that they played. We should pay absolute tribute to them. And I'm also delighted to see the Welsh Guards playing a crucial role in this new deployment. But could the Secretary of State give us a clarity on the breakdown of reserves versus regulars in this deployment? And also, could he say what steps he thinks it will take to protect civilians, to protect humanitarian workers, and also to protect minorities in Afghanistan? There's been some horrendous attacks against the Hindu and Sikh community and other minority communities that have been raised by my constituents. What role will this play in increasing that stability and security?
Secretary of State.
Well, we see this deployment as a very vital part in terms of increasing the stability and security, giving the Afghan forces the confidence to be more forward-leaning in terms of dealing with threats. But actually, it's the political process that is so vital. The Afghan government making the clear message that it is a government that represents every part of Afghanistan and can deliver peace and justice there. The reserves are such an integral part of everything that we do. It will be predominantly regulars, but there will be many, many reserves who will be part of that. But I will give right to the honourable member with further clarity as to the breakdown of numbers.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. British forces are well renowned, not only for their military capability, but also their ability to capture hearts and minds. So could my right honourable friend explain a bit further about the objectives that we're launching here, and also what expertise we're going to apply, which is unique to Britain?
Secretary of State.
Well, we have been absolutely pivotal for creating the ethos and the template for their military academy, giving their armed forces the skills and the training and the knowledge that they need in order to be able to command forces in often very hostile and difficult environments. That skill, as well as actually what we'll bring in terms of command to the KSF, are vital, because actually people turn to us as a nation that has an understanding of Afghanistan and has the ability to lead other nations as well.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Defence Secretary, towards the end of his statement, describes NATO as a cornerstone of our defence in dark and unpredictable times and underlines our commitment to NATO. Given that sentiment, can he assure that that is the sentiment that will be pressed upon the US President this week at the NATO summit, and that we will stand by to defend our allies in NATO against any vocal attacks?
Secretary of State.
The unity of allies is the greatest strength of NATO, and that is a message that I'm sure everyone will sign up to.
Robert Courts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who has briefly worked in New Zealand, I'm very conscious of the ties between our two countries. And whilst NATO is the cornerstone of our defence, I wonder if the Secretary of State would comment upon the importance of the wider military alliance.
Secretary of State.
Well, what we have is a very deep and enduring relationship, not just with New Zealand, but also all Five Eyes nations. And what we are seeing is a deepening of that relationship, not just in terms of operations, but also the sharing of capabilities. And of course, we had the great news of Type 26 frigates being purchased by the Royal Australian Navy. And just at the weekend, I was speaking to my counterpart in New Zealand, and we are looking at how we can operate more together, how we can work together to deal with the threats that are emerging in the world.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I echo comments expressing our thoughts for the families of the Welsh Guards facing this deployment today? Yesterday, the US administration announced that it was going to hold a comprehensive review into its Afghanistan strategy, frustrated due to a lack of progress, and the Secretary of State will be aware, of course, of the initial Trump policy to withdraw from Afghanistan when he assumed the presidency. Considering that we have been at war now in Afghanistan for 17 years, does this latest deployment indicate that in reality the current strategy is failing?
Secretary of State.
We have actually seen over the last few years the United States commitment to Afghanistan grow and also the pressure that it's putting on other partners to contribute to a political solution. The true solution to Afghanistan is a political process. That is what we're promoting, that's what NATO is promoting, that's what the United States is also promoting.
James Heaton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just over 13 years ago, I deployed on my first tour to Afghanistan, which was to Kabul, and I found it very rewarding indeed. I wish the Welsh Guards well. However, the frustration during that tour was the imbalance in commitment and risk appetite between the NATO countries that made up the Kabul multinational brigade. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's not just numbers and budgets that underpin NATO, but the willingness of member states to actually deploy their troops with rules of engagement and a risk appetite that allows them to contribute fully to alliance operations?
Yeah.
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is absolutely correct in his assessment of what is needed for resolute support to work and operate in the best possible way. We need to have those common rules of engagement, and we do have to be forward-leaning to make sure that we give the Afghan government as much support as is required.
Thank you. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Eleanor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move that leave to be given to bring a bill to re-establish the Secretary of State's legal duty as to the National Health Service in England and to make provisions about the other duties of the Secretary of State in regard to make provisions for establishing integrated health boards and about the administration and accountability of the National Health Service in England.